Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's anti-Muslim demand sparks a sharp backlash. Independence Day with a difference. Tanzania's new president takes part in a public cleanup operation. And what happens when you cross Donald Trump with a Star Wars supervillain? Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Global anger towards Republican U.S. presidential frontrunner Donald Trump is rising. Most of his own party and much of the international community has condemned the outspoken candidate for proposing a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until the U.S. leaders can figure out what is going on about possible new terrorist attacks. VOA's Jeff Castor reports.
Trump made the proposal Monday at a rally in South Carolina.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Trump's remarks drew many swift negative responses, including from members of his own party.
Normally, I do not comment on what's going on in the presidential election. I will take an exception today. This is not conservatism. What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for, and more importantly, it's not what this country stands for.
In Geneva, UN Refugee Agency spokeswoman Melissa Fleming said the level of rhetoric is not helpful to UN efforts to relocate Syrian refugees to the U.S.
We have a very strong resettlement program to the United States, and the resettlement program includes Syrian refugees. We're talking about Syrian refugees today, and we are concerned that the rhetoric that is being used in the election campaign is putting an incredibly important resettlement program at risk that is meant for the most vulnerable people, the victims of the wars that the world is unable to stop.
Negative reactions to Trump's comments were expressed in France, Indonesia, Israel's West Bank, and Kosovo, among other places. British Prime Minister David Cameron called Trump's plan, quote, divisive, unhelpful, and quite simply, wrong. Jeff Custer, VOA News, Washington.
Well, the U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly approved a bill that would bar people who have visited Syria, Iraq, or any country or area of concern in the past 5 years from a program that allows visa-free entry to the United States. The legislation is part of a bipartisan push to amend the visa waiver program that currently allows citizens of 38 countries to travel to the United States for stays up to 90 days and less without first obtaining a visa from an embassy or consulate. Before the vote, California Representative Adam Schiff laid out the key elements of the legislation.
The reforms we're voting on today are reasonable. They're appropriately targeted improvements to this important program. Specifically, they'll require that nationals of Iraq and Syria, as well as other designated countries, and those who have traveled to these countries since 2011, undergo an in-person interview with a U.S. official and more rigorous security screening processes prior to traveling to the United States.
Well, the bill, which passed 407 to 19 late Tuesday, would institute a series of changes, including requiring participating countries to check travelers against Interpol database to determine whether they are wanted by law enforcement agencies based on ties to terrorism or criminal activity. To prevent falsification of passports, the measure would require all 38 countries to issue what it calls e-passports containing biometric information. Well, as the political violence in Burundi enters its 8th month, many families in the Burundian capital have moved across town to avoid being caught in clashes between armed youths and security forces. But as Mohammed Yusuf reports, those who have fled say life is not easier.
Chibitoke neighborhood has seen some of the worst violence in Bujumbura since the crisis started in April. The area is considered a stronghold of the opposition. Just a few hundred families remain.
The Life is bad here. We're struggling. There is so much violence, so much gunfire. You cannot go to work. You just decide to remain home. Many families have fled, and I decided to stay because my situation didn't allow me to escape.
The UN says at least 240 people have been killed since April, when people took to the streets to demand President Pierre Nkurunziza not to run for a third term. In July, Nkurunziza won re-election, and the violence has continued. Since August, it has spread to other parts of the capital. Ndashimiya Shura fled to what she thought would be a safer neighborhood in early November. She was wrong.
We cannot sleep. We cannot afford food. We're sleeping 16 people in a one-bedroom house. Where we fled to, there is not enough security. You'll hear gunfire and people running, and you don't know why they are running.
Security forces and government-allied militia have been accused for months of arresting and killing perceived opposition supporters. But the past few weeks have seen an increase in attacks on government targets. Armed vigilantes go out on patrol and have attacked police. The clashes often happen at night, when aid workers say it is dangerous to go out.
We have put in place what we have called hotline. People can call us, and we record the calls, and in the morning we can call them back, and they can tell us where they are. If they are injured, wounded, we go to them and we take them to the hospital.
Many are putting their hopes in a proposed dialogue between the government and the opposition. But the longer the violence goes on, the less likely those talks appear. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Bujumbura.
On to Europe now. Cutting carbon emissions is at the center of the discussions at the Paris Climate Conference. Heather Allen is a COP21 outreach consultant with the Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport out of Belgium. VOA's Kim Lewis caught up with her on the sidelines of the conference.
Well, at the moment there's talk about putting the target at 1.5 degrees centigrade. If this is actually in the agreement post-COP, we know that this will mean over an 80% reduction in emissions from transport by 2050. This is absolutely huge, and therefore there will be no real progress in climate unless we do something about the transport sector.
Well, for more on the ongoing climate talks, VOA's Kim Lewis joins me live via Skyphone from Paris. Kim, what more did Ms. Heather Allen say about the issue of emissions?
Well, Vincent, she held a 3-hour session this afternoon that really focused on bringing young people into the picture regarding climate change, and that included money for them to have build transportation that reduced carbon emissions. She says that children are the future, young people are the future when it comes to mitigating the effects of climate change, and that is what their focus is on. They focus on developed countries as well as developing countries, and the other big push they have is walking when possible. Now, we all cannot walk all the time, but walking is a big part of in helping to reduce climate change. So I think they're really onto something, and not only that, it's very healthy for us as well.
Now, you're close there. Do you hear anything regarding what's going on in the negotiations? Are there any indications, any voices that would suggest they are getting closer to any agreement?
I haven't really heard that. What the NGOs are saying the last couple of hours, I talked with some people, and they're saying the negotiations have been very difficult because they can't come to an agreement on the money aspect of it, what country is going to pay what and when. So it's come down to really money and allocation of funds and how that is going to be done. So I think until they come to terms with that and who's going to do what, I think it's still going to be a very difficult thing to agree on.
Do the people sometimes, have some particular countries they think are possibly the bigger obstacles in these negotiations?
I really haven't heard of any particular countries at this point. So at this point, no, I don't know.
Okay, so we presume that the talks probably are going on well, and we hope to get some good news from there. Kim, thanks a lot
Absolutely,
for
yes.
reporting. Yes, thank you. VOA's Kim Lewis reporting live via Skype phone from Paris. Now, the United Nations says roughly 1/3 of the food produced worldwide is lost or wasted. In addition to failing to feed the world's hungry, the loss and waste also contributes to climate change. Agriculture and forestry are responsible for nearly 1/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. VOA's Steve Baragona has more.
There are 6 restaurants feeding the 40,000 people here at COP21, the UN climate conference. But even the most eco-conscious diner creates food waste, more than a ton of it per day here. Handling that food waste is a 2-year-old startup company called Molino Compost and Biogas. Meet the garbage man of COP21, owner Stefan Martinez.
We are very happy to collect the bio-waste in the COP21 because it's the first time who have a big event.
Martinez didn't start out in waste management. He's a restaurateur. He owns 3 around Paris. But he's passionate about his nightly excursions, making something useful out of food waste.
For me, it's most important to do. The bio-waste, it's 80% of water. You don't have to put it in the incinerator.
Instead, he sends it to a plant outside Paris that ferments that trash to make methane and burns the gas to make electricity.
Okay, these are also kitchen waste.
Serge Verdier heads BioNerval, the company that owns the plant. He says food waste contains a surprising amount of energy.
The average quantity of waste generated to prepare a meal and some of the small bits and pieces that you leave on your plate, when you take all this together, you can generate enough electricity to have your laptop work for more than 2 hours.
And France wants to generate more electricity from food waste. It's part of the country's plan to cut its greenhouse gas emissions. Cutting food waste, making electricity, protecting the planet, for restaurants, it can be a piece of cake. Steve Baragona, VOA News, Paris.
Well, the impact of climate change is always a hotly debated topic. And for more perspective on the link between the climate change, poverty and hunger, I'm joined by Ms. Faustine Wabwire, a senior foreign assistant policy analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. Ms. Wabwire, welcome to Africa 54.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we just sent that package about food, and there's always this discussion going on. And for people like you, you're very much interested in how it impacts, the climate impacts food production, and also, of course, the uplifting of people from poverty. First, what are the links?
Thank you. First of all, we have to understand and recognize the critical role that agriculture plays in the livelihoods of millions of people around the world. Agriculture is very sensitive to changes in climate, as we already know. And at the same time, today, there's overwhelming evidence that the changing weather patterns, higher temperatures, dramatic rainfall changes are actually affecting smallholder farmers the most. And countries with limited adaptive capacity actually have a harder time growing food and securing their livelihoods.
Mm-hmm. And how do the other parts of the negotiations for a climate change deal affect, for example, the conversation around ensuring more food production and reduction of poverty?
Right. So actually we are watching the Paris talks very closely, and one thing that we really hope is a long-term agreement that does 3 things. One, provides financial and technical support to poorest countries and those that are most vulnerable. Secondly, we also want to see an agreement that reflects climate targets from all countries. And finally, we want this long-term framework to incentivize countries to begin to really cut down their carbon emissions and hopefully with time come to a very low carbon emission by the end of the century.
The United States is a key player in these talks on climate change. How can the United States play a bigger role and in fact lead the way in integrating the climate change talks or the deal with food security?
Right. So in March of this year, 2015, President Obama actually laid out a very clear outline of how the U.S. itself is trying to cut down its own carbon emissions. But alongside with that, we would like to see the U.S. government actually integrate climate change adaptation in its overall global food security agenda. And one of the immediate things that we hope to see, first, we would like Congress to pass the Global Food Security Act of 2015. It's very important and critical at this time as we face climate change. The legislation actually would help to codify important initiatives like Feed the Future, which supports smallholder farmers, it strengthens the capacity of smallholder farmers and countries to build the capacity it needs to deal with the increasing shocks of climate change.
So here we're saying if the United States can do that here, then it can actually work better with partners and organizations like yours in helping countries like those in developing nations and countries like in Africa to also integrate that component of food security and climate policies.
Absolutely. And I think what's the opportunity here is to support countries' efforts to strengthen their own national capacities and research institutions, to also help to train younger or the next generation of agricultural leaders, but also strengthen partnerships between research institutions in richer countries with those countries that would benefit from some of the advances that have been developed to date.
Now, the Pope recently just returned from Africa. How significant was his message on climate change?
You know, I think it's really important for us to really continue to pay attention to what the Pope has been saying over time. You remember, even before going to Africa, he was here in the United States and made a compelling argument as to why it's important for us to confront climate change right now. In his encyclical released in July of this year, the message was very consistent. He talks about the millions of people around the world whose lives are already devastated by the effects of climate change. The Pope took the same message to the countries he visited in Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and the Central African Republic, urging leaders to come together because this is a moral obligation and we are in this together. We've got to protect our planet, which he calls our common home.
Exactly. Thank you very much. We hope everybody can work together and really realize that we're in this all together. Yeah.
Yes,
thank you very much, Ms. Obwire. While Ms. Faustina Obwire is a senior foreign assistant policy analyst at Bread for the World Institute. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Well, coming up, talk about clean politics at Tanzania's unusual Independence Day commemoration. Stay with us.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
Sugary donuts, soft drinks of every kind, these are common foods for many children, and child obesity rates around the world are on the rise. In the United Kingdom, a group in Parliament is proposing restrictions on junk food advertising. Childminder Jacqueline Herve wants children in her care to learn healthier eating habits.
If you give them too much sugar, their palate becomes so accustomed to sweet food and then they don't want to eat things like sprouts, sweet potatoes, broccoli.
But can or should the government push people toward different foods? Mark Littlewood with the Institute of Economic Affairs says no.
I think sometimes those from or around the medical profession just get irritated that free people don't behave exactly as they would wish.
The World Health Organization estimates that some 40 million kids were overweight in 2013. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Welcome back. Now, there was a major break in tradition in Tanzania on Wednesday. New President John Magufuli joined hundreds of residents in Dar es Salaam to participate in a public cleanup operation instead of the usual festive Independence Day celebrations. Mr. Magufuli swept and picked up trash from the street, a move being seen as symbolic of the president's promise to tackle corruption. January Makamba, a parliamentarian and member of the ruling Chama cha Mapinduzi party, also participated in the operation. Earlier, I spoke with him by phone and asked him about the significance of Mr. Magufuli's actions.
when the president was a candidate and he was campaigning for the office that he's holding at the moment, he made a promise to change the way the country is governed and to start with really dealing with wasteful spending. And once he took office, he has lived up to that promise. And one of the actions that he took was to say that, look, we can't celebrate independence in a very pompous and ostentatious way, an expensive way, while our people are dying of cholera, a simple disease that can be dealt with cleanliness. So one of the many steps that he took was to cancel the Independence Parade and to say that, every Tanzanian will spend that day cleaning their environment near their houses and the communities. So today the Tanzanians came out in full force, in large numbers, very enthusiastically supporting and standing behind the president. And it was quite a very significant, both symbolically but also practically, that, indicated that the Tanzanians are standing behind the president. We're all supporting him, in the actions that he's taking at the moment. Great Independence Day for Tanzania.
Honorable Makamba, how has been the reaction from within the party, from the party stalwarts who might have found this to be such a dramatic break from tradition?
When we nominated Dr. Magufuli to be our candidate, we knew the style, the type of leadership that he represents. We needed, his style and his way of doing things. He was not new to the party. He was known, and his style was known. So all of us in the party expected him to do exactly what he's doing. We are, in fact, getting a new lifeline, and, future elections will be easier. And, in fact, they're making, Dr. Magufuli and what he's doing is making the opposition irrelevant. But to add to that, the party central committee, which is a very important, party organ, which is full of, as you're saying, party stalwarts, yesterday, and, came out with a decision to support the president's action that he has taken, since taking office. So all of us in the party are behind the president. This is what we wanted. This is what we expected. And it is helping our party, survive in the future elections and recruitment.
Now, Honorable Makamba, the actions of President Magufuli have actually resonated with especially young people across the continent of Africa, to the extent that they have started a hashtag, what would Magufuli do in every situation, especially looking at his cost-cutting and money-saving actions, including the stoppage of travel by senior government officials. But also there's some who may be a little skeptical. Will he continue with this in the next year, in the next 2 years, or even up to the end of his term?
There's absolutely no doubt, that this is a permanent way. That our country is seeing, witnessing major transformation. You only need to look at his history and his record, since 1995 when he first got into the cabinet. In the past 20 years, his energy, his commitment, his determination, his persistence in following through things has never been in question. So, we know from his record, we know from his type of leadership, in fact, we should expect more and not less from him.
Well, General Makamba of CCM speaking to me from Dar es Salaam. But it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, the Star Wars Donald Trump mashup sheds some light on the dark side. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Burundi, witnesses say police killed 5 men in a night of violence in areas with strong opposition to President Pierre Nkurunziza. In Ethiopia, this year's El Niño causes severe drought, leaving 5.75 million children facing critical food shortages. In Ghana, the Judicial Council fires 20 judges after they're accused of taking bribes. In Ivory Coast, the parliament protests a French warrant to question Speaker of Parliament Guillaume Soro on accusations of kidnapping and torture. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. We begin with a video that has become viral sensation that's ahead of the cultural curve.
Would be so bold. The Imperial Senate will not sit still for this. When they hear you've attacked a...
How dare the press not believe me that I went after my mother with a hammer? He said...
With the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump making headlines for proposing that Muslims be barred from entering the U.S., let's take a deep breath and have a few laughs watching this mashup of Star Wars movies with real-life audio from Trump dubbed in for Darth Vader. You can watch the whole thing on the Oral Nerds YouTube channel while getting in the mood for Star Wars. The Force Awakens, which opens on December the 18th. Well, next up, the trailer for the much-anticipated sequel to the Oscar-winning film from the year 2000, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, has arrived. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Green Legend, is directed by the famed fight choreographer Yuen Woo-ping, who also choreographed the fight scenes in The Matrix. It will hit Netflix and IMAX theaters next year and be released theatrically in China. The announcement about the movie last year met with controversy. American cinema chain Regal Entertainment Group announced that they would not show the film in their theaters, saying the company did not want to debut a movie that would be available on demand on the same day. Well, and finally, a stringless virtual guitar is putting the power of music literally in the palms of people's hands. Well, the curved guitar consists of a button pad that fits neatly into the player's hand, an oversized sensor-packed guitar pick that recognizes strumming movements. Now, the developers say it can allow anyone to learn and play songs in a matter of minutes, even if they have never picked up a real guitar. Now, chords and notes are generated by pressing down on the buttons on the palm pad and strumming with a pick. Now, the smartphone app decodes the force and movements of the pick to produce the desired sound. I need that. Well, and that's what's trending today. That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us here in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When you're listening to American English, you might hear this phrase.
Out of your mind.
Is someone who is out of their mind thinking straight?
I just got 2 tickets to see Paul McCartney in concert. Want to go with me?
Oh my gosh, that would be so cool. How much were the tickets?
$200. I bought them from someone, so I had to pay a little more.
Whoa, are you out of your mind? Sorry, but I'm not going to pay that much.
Out of your mind means you were a little crazy or not thinking straight. This is an informal saying. Sometimes it can be said in anger, but you can also say this to a friend in a humorous way.
You must be out of your mind.
And that's English in a Minute.